Hi everyone, I'm going to walk you through the PowerPoint called Phrase Structure Rules. So the first thing that we need to do is start with some definitions. So the first definition is constituent, and I introduced you to this word when we were looking at parts of speech. So this is the idea that we can have different parts of speech that make up constituents, but also phrases or groups of words that go together. So for example, a single word noun can be a constituent, and a noun phrase can also be a constituent. And that brings us to the idea of recursion. The idea of recursion is that there are structures that can be found inside of other structures. So for example, we could have a noun that might be something like the book on the table, and so the whole thing is a noun phrase, and then that's made up of two constituents, a noun, the book, and on the table, a prepositional phrase. And then inside the prepositional phrase, that's made up of a couple of constituents, a preposition and a noun phrase. So the idea is that we've got a larger noun phrase that's made up of prepositional phrase, and then that is made up of partially a noun phrase. So that's the idea of recursion. And we can keep embedding more structures inside of more structures, and we can basically do that forever. So then we have phrase structure, and that just means that each phrase has its own specific rules or its own specific structure. What we want to do when we're looking at a phrase is we want to try to find the head word, the most important word of that phrase, and that is going to tell us what kind of phrase it is. So that's what the phrase structure rules are. And they're going to be written like the example here that shows X and then the arrow and then the Y plus Z. So the X in this case might be a noun phrase, and then the arrow means that it's made up of those things, or it could be made up of those things. And so we know that for nouns, it's possible that a noun phrase can be made up of a determiner plus a noun. And then we can also indicate some optional constituents, and then those are going to have parentheses around them. So here's an example, the cute puppies in the garden. That is the noun phrase that we're looking at. And so we can have noun phrases that are made up of single nouns, and those would be puppies, garden. Then we could have noun phrases that are made up of a determiner plus a noun, and there's one here, the garden. And then we could also have a noun phrase that's made up of a determiner, an adjective, and a noun, and that's the cute puppies. And then we've also got a prepositional phrase in there that is going to be in the garden. And if we wanted to break down the prepositional phrase, we could say that the prepositional phrase is made up of a preposition and a noun phrase. So this is what phrase structure rules look like when you write them out. The idea here is that we can show the hierarchy of sentences. We can show the structure of sentences. Another way to do this is to draw trees. We are not going to draw trees for this class, but I did want to show you some trees so you can get a visual of what the trees will look like. And then here is a tree for a prepositional phrase. The book on the table is an example of recursion. So that just means that just like the puppies in the garden example above, the book on the table is a whole noun phrase. That whole thing in a sentence could be replaced with it. So we know it's a noun phrase. And then it's made up of a determiner, a noun, and then a prepositional phrase. And then we can break down that prepositional phrase to show that it has to include a noun phrase. And so we can see that we've got a noun phrase, and inside it there's another constituent, and then inside that there's another noun phrase, and we can keep going deeper and deeper and keep embedding if we want. Here's a tree with a lot of recursion. There's actually nothing to stop us from just continuing to add prepositional phrases to the end of this, as long as it makes sense in our sentence. So it's important to point out here that any neurotypical human 2-year-old can do this. They can say sentences like this. They can understand sentences like this. And then in contrast, a chimpanzee or a gorilla can never do this. So the chimpanzee or gorilla can only make very simple sentences that are linear. They can't do embedding like this. And they probably would only be able to say sentences that they have heard someone else say before. They couldn't create their own original sentences. Here's an example of what a tree would look like for a verb phrase. And then the largest constituent that we're going to deal with is a sentence. So a sentence in English is always made up of a noun phrase plus a verb phrase. And then if we want to go deeper, we can look at what makes up noun phrases and what makes up verb phrases. But this is always going to be what sentences look like. And here's a tree for a sentence. It's always going to have that branching at the top with the S on the top, and then the NP going to the left and the VP going to the right. That is just how English sentences are. And then a final thing is conjunctions. So we can take any structure, any constituent, and then just take a conjunction and pile them up on top of each other. So this is another way that we can make our sentences infinitely long. And here's an example of a tree with conjoined phrases. So these are 2 noun phrases. But we could also have conjunctions that join sentences together. And again, this is a really simple sentence that any English speaker can handle and can understand it. They can say it. But when you look down at the structure of it, you can see that it's quite complicated. And that is the way human language works. So the idea here with phrase structure is that we are doing our best to try to capture the hierarchy that the words and the constituents and the phrases and the sentences have with one another in our real-time human language that we speak.